Welcome. Today's guest is a husband, father, author, sought-after international speaker and trainer, actor, poet, songwriter, master results coach, and the owner of Elite Success Systems, a personal development and human healing company that has transformed hundreds of thousands of lives around the world. Having survived a tragic accident, he has dedicated his life's work to creating neuro-transformation. Hailed as North America's next greatest speaker, he is one of the very few people to deliver 2 spoken word TEDx performances. Dear Racism, a breakup letter from a white man, and the power of vulnerability in men. He is passionate about helping men heal their masculine wounds, and he wrote and performed I Do Mom, a powerful one-man show about his mommy issues. Committed to creating conscious conversations to help heal the racial divide, he co-wrote, produced, and starred with Lisa Nichols and David Bianchi in the award-winning spoken word short film, Let's Grow. Please welcome Sean Smith. Welcome, Sean. It's so great to have you here.
It is fantastic to be with you.
Wow, you have had quite a journey. You do so many things. How did you get started in personal development?
Yeah, it was actually really neat to hear you list, a lot of those things because it just took me back through so much of my journey. You mentioned the near-death accident. So when I was 13 years old, I was almost killed by a car as I was riding my bicycle. And the details of the accident, if you read the police report and all the details, I mean, I shouldn't have survived. And so I had this huge epiphany in the hospital room that night. Just this 13-year-old kid, and I'd see the world. I had seen it through these, immortal lenses, I think, like a lot of us do. And then just like that, I was high on life, but I could have died. And so I realized that no matter where we are and no matter how amazing life is, no matter what our circumstances, we're not promised our next breath. And that fundamentally changed everything for me. It changed the way I looked at the world. It changed my thoughts on success. I made a promise to myself that if I don't know when my life is going to end, then I won't settle for mediocrity. And I changed lanes, like literally and figuratively that day. I started hanging out with different people and so forth. So that started my journey into the whole world of success, just, studying goal setting and thinking about different things and talking about different things. And then fast forward about 20 years, I was newly married and we had a couple kids at the time. And I was just kind of fumbling around, trying to find myself and bouncing around from, place to place. I had been a probation officer actually right out of high school, or right out of college rather. And then I was a teacher for several years inside of school. But once we had my daughter, who was our first child, I just didn't want to work. I didn't want to, I wanted to keep working, but I didn't want to have to peel her off of me in the mornings and go to school on somebody else's schedule. So that's what kind of got me into the whole world of personal development and self-employment and so forth. But I was still just toiling around for several years until I landed in a man that, you know very well, Jack Canfield's seminar. And when I went to Jack's seminars called Breakthrough to Success back in 2005, I believe, it was the first time that anybody had really talked to me about purpose and values and how we actually are in control of a lot more things in our lives than I thought we were in control of. And over the course of those 7 days, I started to touch goals that I hadn't really touched in a while, and dreams and emotions and this sense of purpose. And then I had this really profound and deep experience where I just realized that I'm here for more. I'm here for, like, I've got something in my DNA that that needs to come out of me. And that's what really dove me into this idea that I actually might want to do this work, right? Like be a speaker and write books and actually maybe make a difference in people's lives. So that was the origin of me saying, I think I want to do this thing.
Yeah. I find it fascinating that at 13, when you had your accident, you got really clear on the fact that time is not promised.
Hmm.
And the immortality of youth, shall we say, dissipated. And you got intentional about who you were hanging out with and how you were going to spend your time. And I find it fascinating that that led to teaching and working with the criminal justice system.
Hmm.
And yet then it was the birth of your daughter, and again, time, not wanting to be on someone else's schedule. That's a really profound, actually, full circle moment. Going back
Yeah,
to that, this is the one thing that you can't get more of, that you don't know how much time you have, and really that you want to spend that time with your daughter. You want to be the one to be able to take her to school. You want to be the one to dictate how your time is spent. So I love that full circle moment and that tug that then ultimately led you to Jack and to knowing that you wanted more.
I love how you dissected that and put those together. And it's so true. I mean, time is the thing that for all of us is going to continue ticking no matter what we do. If we try to resist it or we try to avoid it. And I think a lot of us, and I was doing this too, and I still fall in this pattern, as I'm sure most people do. We tend to want to skip over, whatever pieces of time we're not enjoying, whether that's a Monday through Friday, if somebody has a job, or difficult situations in family, or things that are just going on in our lives that we're not really liking the experience of. We tend to just want to get out of this moment in time and get to that moment in time, whatever that moment is, whether it's the weekend or a better place or when I lose 30 pounds or whatever it is. And that causes us to fall into a cycle of not being present. And if we're trying to get out of this moment for whatever reason, then even if we hit that moment, we're in a cycle of not being in the moment anyway. So then when the moment is quote unquote right for us to experience, we actually don't experience it at any kind of deep level because we're just constantly trying to get out of the moment. And then we're just basically, running from ourselves. And I know you believe this, like that's just not the way I want to live life.
What life is it if you're constantly running from yourself, right? The beauty is in the journey. It's in those moments, those magical moments, the good and the bad. Our dear friend Lisa Nichols likes to say that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in sandpaper. And, to your point, that sometimes it's not comfortable or sometimes you don't love where you are right now. So, how do you help people find the magic in those moments? Embrace the sandpaper, stay present. How do you help them do that?
I think, first of all, we have to understand what life offers us, but nothing's a guarantee. And life doesn't really give us any particular experiences, but it gives us access to all of them. And it's really up to us to sort of pick and choose how much we're going to engage in life. And so the idea that we have access, but we're still in control to a large degree. So just because we have circumstances around us, whether they're good or bad, if we don't want to engage, we have all kinds of ways, especially nowadays with smartphones and computers and social media and internet technology and all that. We have a million ways to disengage from the circumstances of life. And if we have some kind of limiting belief or something, and we don't believe that we are made for the positive stuff or we deserve it, then we can disengage or resist and not receive what's available to us. So I think two things are coming to me as you ask the question. Number one, we have to understand that concept that we are in control of what we can touch and what we can access. And then number two, what do we want? I mean, why are we here, right? We throw that word purpose around a lot, but I think a lot of us don't really fully understand, or we don't stay plugged into the depth of that word purpose. You know, what's the point? What's the point of waking up? What's the point of having food? What's the point of communicating with people that you love or people that you have some conflict with? What's the point of life? You know, at a big level, what's the point of life? And I think a lot of people might have some idea of what the grand purpose of their life is, but I think a lot of us don't really focus on what the granular purpose of our life is. And so for me, what I've learned is that part of life is to feel. I mean, that's what makes this human experience sacred, is our ability to feel and process and assess and do all the things that our brain has evolved to do. And yet so many of our behavior patterns are literally detaching us from our human experience. And so if we want a human experience, so when I was 13 years old and I had this huge epiphany in the hospital room, I imagined myself looking back on my life, and I imagined what it would feel like to look back with regret. I imagine looking back and going, what if I wouldn't have gotten addicted to drugs? And what if I wouldn't have become addicted to alcohol? And what if I wouldn't have joined the gangs? And what if I wouldn't have sabotaged myself? And what if I would have really given my all? You know, what could I have become? And so it was almost like visiting, you know, the future and imagining a life that didn't go well, but then taking responsibility and ownership in that moment when it was too late. And so that's why I made the promise to myself that I will never have that conversation with myself. And not that, you know, I haven't done a lot of things that I regret, or it's not like I've, you know, operating at 100% capacity all the time, but at least like the big decisions. And one of the promises I made to myself is I want to live while I'm alive. And so part of living is feeling. And the beautiful thing about our abilities as humans is that we also get to relate to our feelings. And what most of us are trying to do is we're trying to avoid the negative feelings. And so we think there's a way to only turn off the negative feelings, but turn on the positive feelings. And that's not possible. You know, your feelings are just like a single switch. They're either all on or they're all off. So when we understand that, if we want to feel the depth of sacredness in life, then we have to feel. And that is a moment by moment decision. And what I found is when things are getting tough, when I feel whatever the challenges are coming up and bubbling up and my tears are starting to flow, I've just learned to value the human experience in that moment. I've not learned how to, nor do I try to teach anybody how to enjoy negative feelings.
Yeah.
But we can value them.
Yeah.
And that's where some of my biggest breakthroughs, I'm sure you would agree, have come from. Sitting in the discomfort of humanity, but that's where the joy actually can be found.
Yeah, that's where the contemplation happens. That's where the reflection happens. That's
Yeah.
where we can really step in and choose. I mean, you mentioned, what would you love? Like, what do you want? How do you want it to be? And to be in that moment, sometimes in the valley, where we look around and say, how did I get here? Or is this all there is? Or where we say, I don't want to live like this anymore. These feelings that I'm having, or these experiences that I'm having, or the circumstances that I am experiencing are not the life that I desire. They're not what I want. And sometimes you got to hit that rock bottom to get that fire in your belly to then step forward. But I love the framework of, it's not about enjoying the feelings. It's about being present with them and embracing the journey, the human experience, the feelings and the sensations of being alive.
That's everyone.
I love that framework that you how you described it. It's really powerful.
I wrote a poem recently with a couple stanzas that speak to this, and I'd love to share them if you don't
Yes,
mind.
please.
This isn't the full poem, but there's just a couple stanzas in here. And I write, so it's time to pay all your emotional bills, to release all the guilts, release all the ills, find peace in the valleys and pride in the hills. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the hills give us peace, but the valleys yield pride. Theirs are the tales you shouldn't dare to hide, because the climb back up is what makes you strong. Those lyrics give more meaning to your sacred song. It's everything that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
It's like we actually, not only do we have more presence in the valleys when things aren't going well, at least access to presence, that's what makes us reflect. And that's what makes us ask questions. And that's what causes us to touch something that when we're riding high, we generally don't touch.
Yeah.
And when we have to answer certain questions and learn certain lessons about how did I get here and what kind of life do I want to live, adversity is really the only thing that causes us to ask those questions. And the answers to those questions are the ones that give us the biggest breakthroughs going forward, and ultimately give us the joy that we feel is missing in those moments when we're in the valleys. So if we learn to just embrace that human journey, it's insane what we have access to. And it really saddens me that so many of us are programmed to do the opposite.
Yeah.
So many of us are programmed to just avoid all feelings and avoid adversity and pretend everything is great, because then we miss out on all the things that we just talked about.
Yeah, and you dive into this particularly with the work that you do with men and healing their masculine pain. So, talk to us a little bit about that.
Whew. I can feel, like, even when you just bring that up, I feel the resonance of that in my body. You mentioned the one-man play that I did a few years back, and it's called I Do, Mom, and it's about my relationship with my own mother and what I learned in the process of going in and doing my own research for that play. And just to give you a real quick backstory, I had a terrible relationship with my mom growing up. She was the bad guy in my story. I just decided that she didn't love me. She wasn't the mom that I was supposed to have. And so I pushed her away. And I did that for multiple decades. And when I got into the personal development work, I still had so much of the residue built up that even though I wanted to change, I didn't know how. I couldn't just flip the switch and all of a sudden just be loving, even though I know this woman gave birth to me and she's my mom and the only one that I'll ever have. I knew all that stuff, but I couldn't actually make the shift until I really went inside and I explored why I chose her as the bad guy in my story. Why did I demonize her? Why did I pull away? And ultimately, what I found is what I now call the masculine wound. And what that means is the energy of masculinity, which is not only male, women have it as well, and men have femininity too. The energy of masculinity is extremely insecure in its wounded state. In its pure sacred state, masculinity protects everything that it loves and everything that loves it. And it doesn't try to hurt anybody. It just is this real rigid form of protection. In its wounded state, when it's been hurt, usually by the masculine, then the insecurity of the masculine wound tends to try to hurt somebody else. So it's this pass on trauma, right? You took something from me, so I need to take something from somebody else. Or you made me feel inadequate, so in order to restore that, I'm going to make somebody else feel inadequate. And that is what is programmed in a lot of our men's societies, where we tend to try to feel better about ourselves by pulling other people down. And this becomes a cycle. And that's one of the reasons why there's not a whole lot of intimacy within men, man and man, or men and just anybody else in our lives. And we're actually afraid of vulnerability, because at some point in time we were vulnerable and then we got taken advantage of, whether we're talking about abuse or we're just talking about somebody bullying us or somebody just laughing at us. We learn through our programming that vulnerability is not okay because somebody is going to take advantage of it. And so that's what I call this masculine wound. And I realized that I was using my masculine wound to hurt this woman, my mother. And I knew on some level that she wouldn't punch back, which made it safe for me to punch her. And it's sickening as I say this, and it's disgusting for me to say it out loud, but it's the truth that I learned about myself. So she was the perfect punching bag for the insecure wound that I had, because insecurity actually doesn't want a fair fight. Like bullies, they don't fight against the people that have black belts in karate. Bullies fight against the people that they perceive won't fight back because they perceive a weakness. And that's the way this wound operates. So that's what I was doing with my mom. And it was only through deep, deep work and exploration and reflection that I recognized that the ammo I was using on my mom was my own pain and my own shame and my own insecurity. And so that gave me an invitation to do the work with myself. And it also allowed me to invite a conversation with her where we connected at a level that we had never connected before. And the beautiful part about that is, in this conversation, I was able to see her pain and her humanity for the first time, instead of just seeing her as I wouldn't have ever used the word abuser back then, because she never really did anything to me. It was all one-way verbal abuse, me to her. But she was the bad guy. And now I can look back and realize that I decided she didn't nurture me. But that was all my projection. And so once I did that work and we had this conversation, I saw her as the human that she is. And I allowed myself to feel her strength, and I allowed myself to feel her unconditional love. And now I can look back and realize I was actually terrified of unconditional love because it didn't feel safe to me. So not only with my mom, but with a lot of other women in my life, I pushed them away because I was afraid of that masculinity. So the process of me going in and doing this one-man show gave me a deeper understanding of this masculine wound and our fear of vulnerability. And what I really want men to understand, specifically men, not that this doesn't apply a lot to women, because masculine programming absolutely applies, but specifically for men, because of the way we operate with ourselves in our circles, what we do and don't do with our sons, what we do and don't do with our male friends on the sports field. There's a programming that needs to embrace vulnerability and authenticity if we're ever going to feel stable in our masculinity. So that, and it's not easy work. It's not easy work for any of us that have held up these walls of protection and pretending that we are strong and pretending we have no fear and, not having any emotions. It's not easy to allow or to create the space for somebody to drop those walls. But we have to, because we're hurting people when we don't.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I want all men to consider, because this was the biggest shift for me, is who am I hurting through my protection? And when you realize, I'll speak for myself, when I realized that without intending it, I was actually hurting my wife. I was actually hurting my daughter. I was giving her something, an experience that I didn't want her to see. I'm hurting my son. I'm hurting people in my life. I was hurting friendships that I had. And ultimately, I was hurting myself. Then we can put it down and recognize that there's this sacred masculinity that we can fall into that truly has the strength of the world, Like there's nothing that can overpower rooted,
Yep.
sacred masculinity, but we need to fall into that. And that really is about removing all the layers of protection and
Mhm.
insecurity and programs and all that stuff that we've had. And then the beautiful thing is when we can do that with our masculinity, then sacred masculinity and pure femininity can work together like the yin yang symbol without threatening each other. And that's when the union, whether we're talking about inside an individual body or with two people in a romantic relationship or across the globe, then the union can actually work for the betterment of everybody. But it's the masculine wound that needs to heal for that to take place.
Absolutely. And I love the question that you invite men to consider. Who am I hurting? What is another step that someone early in their journey who is hearing this for the first time and they're starting to feel that awakening and have that light bulb go on, like, oh, wow, I am wounded and I would like to heal through this. So once they've asked themselves, who am I hurting with this? Then what can they do next?
That's a great question. I love constantly, giving some tangible steps. What's the next thing? I would say to ask the opposite question, who do I want to be? And for me, I asked, what lessons do I want to give my children? I have two kids, a boy and a girl. My son is watching me as a model. My daughter is watching me as a model, but in a different way.
Mhm.
My son is looking at me and wondering who he can be as a man and who he wants to be because he resonates with me as a man. My daughter is watching who I am in my marriage, who she deserves, or what kind of love is safe. And so I'll give you an example. I had this program of a lot of repressed anger. And because I didn't want to let my anger out on my family, which I didn't, I chose to bottle it in. And what I had the pattern of doing for a long time is once I started to get angry, I would leave.
Mhm.
Now, in the moment, I felt that's better than erupting, yelling at my wife or yelling at my kids. And maybe it is, who cares? But I was showing them that when things get tough,
Mhm.
dad runs.
Yeah.
And my son said that to my wife one time. He said there was something that I was frustrated with. We, got a little into a little verbal awkwardness, I guess. And I left. And it was in a supermarket, and I just walked away and went to another lane because I didn't want to blow up on whatever it was. And my wife told me later that Exley's my son's name. She said, "Yeah, Exley said Dad left like he always does." I mean, I feel
Yeah.
the pain in that, like he always does. And so it caused me to ask a different question. What do I want to show him?
Mhm.
And a lot of times we don't know what actions to take. This kind of goes back to the purpose idea
Yeah.
because we don't know actually what we want to do or how we want to be or what we want to teach. So for anybody that has children, this is an easy one for people that have biological kids or
Okay.
adopted children, or really anybody that's in your family looking up at you. What do you want to teach them? And the only way to
Mhm.
teach is to show. One of the things that I fully believe, this is a theme that goes into all of my work with parents, is that your kids are not listening to the lecture, they're watching the show. The
Yeah.
only thing that matters is what we show them with our behavior. Now, if somebody doesn't have children of any kind that you can imagine are looking up at you, we all have a child inside that's watching us. And a lot of times, our most valuable audience member is the child inside of us
Yeah.
that's watching everything we do, obviously. But wherever that source of leverage can come from, recognize that you're showing somebody something and
Mhm.
you're putting energy out that's then attracting whatever it is that's coming back to you. And a lot of us get frustrated. This is something that I learned relatively early on in my career, but it was a huge shift. I was putting out energy of blame and shame
Mhm.
and frustration and all the stuff that that was a factor of me not doing my own personal work, right? Not confronting these things. And so I was just energetically projecting it out. And, people don't want that. People don't run toward the shame magnet, right? And we need to understand that that energy is actually being projected if we're not working with it. So to try to recap your question, get really clear, and I would actually write it down, get really extremely clear. And it's okay if you don't believe this is even possible for you yet, but get really clear, as though you were writing a script for a screenplay or for a scene in a movie. Get really, really clear on what you want this scene to look like, what you want to have the capacity for. Because until we have some sort of target, it's like opening up your phone and opening up the GPS system, but not telling it where you want to go.
Yeah.
It can't give you directions unless you tell it where you want to go. It also can't give you directions unless you tell it where you currently are.
Yep.
So pay attention to the moments that you, I'm going to put this in quotes, fail yourself.
Yeah.
Meaning you don't act the way you want to act. You don't show what you want to show. So take a little inventory of where you are now.
Yep.
Where do you want to be? And just that right there is, now you've got 2 starting points. And now, depending on what you come up with, this is going to be individual to the person. Chunk it down and work on whatever it is that's on that bridge between where you are and there. And I would say for most men, it's going to be in the vein of what I was saying earlier. It's going to be who hurt us, usually a man in our lives, whether it's our father, a father figure, a sports coach, a teacher, somebody that we saw on TV. Somebody hurt us and told us that we need to be always strong, that we need to always win, that we need to always conquer women and conquer whatever the journey is. We need to be warriors. And if we're not valuable. And to a man, to this masculine male programming, I would say the worst thing is to be not valuable. When we don't feel valuable, then we have no point. So if we recognize, how did we learn that we're not valuable? What were we taught that we need to do to get value in the eyes of other men? That will be a good starting place.
So powerful to look through the lens of, when were we taught that we weren't valuable if we didn't do these things or didn't show up in these ways, and then to be able to really reframe that. I think for women, we come from the place of not feeling worthy.
Yeah.
And so I love actually the parallels between the masculine valuable, the feminine worthiness.
Worthy.
They're the same.
They really, really are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they come from the same source. And it's usually this masculine kind of patriarchal, I make the rules and you follow the rules. I'm really glad you put that parallel. Like if these are the rules that the masculine has put down, if I'm a man and I don't follow the rules, well, then I'm not valuable. And you're a woman, so you don't even get a say in the rules because you're not worthy. And I think that what happens on either side of that line is different for the masculine and the feminine, and for men and women. But it really, the wound comes from the same place. It really does. I love that similarity there.
So yeah, so powerful. What a realization. Now, we've talked a lot about being able to heal those wounds. And you've talked about purpose and getting clear on where you are and where you want to be. Now, we know that life happens. Stuff is going to come up, stuff is going to get in the way. So when you know where you are and you know where you want to be and you know what that purpose is, how do you stay aligned?
The simple answer that I've learned is to get quiet. Life happens, as you said, and the way that our brain operates to understand what just happened to us and protect us from that ever happening again, and for us to retain our status, and the way our ego works, we get really loud. and we get really complicated. And then we tell ourselves stories. And the way a story works, like a belief inside of a human, is just like the way a lie works. If you tell a lie, at some point in time, you're going to have to tell another lie to support the lie that you started. And then you're going to have to tell another lie to support those two. And in our lives, when we make stories up about what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman or the danger of vulnerability or any of those stories that are all based on some kind of painful experience we had, at some point in time, we have to tell another story, because the story that we created actually isn't the truth. It's just based on how we feel, and we want to protect ourselves. So we start telling stories, then we tell another story, and then we tell another story, and then we tell another story. And pretty soon we've created this massively complicated human ecosystem in our brain. And we've got so many stories. It's like balloons up in the air and they're coming down, and our job feels like to not let any of them hit the ground, but literally there's hundreds. And so we're just constantly chasing balloons. We're constantly swimming in the complication of human protection. The answer to that is to not chase the complication. The answer to that is actually get quiet, get still. Sometimes it means just listen to the stories. If you just listen to the stories that you tell yourself as an audience member without trying to agree or not, or trying to justify or not, you just listen to the stories, pretty soon it's like they'll just start to melt, right? Because you'll recognize that's just a story. That's actually not the truth. And so the beautiful part of human transformation is that it happens with unlearning. It doesn't happen with learning. And so we need to let go of the layers that we've put on. We need to let go of the stories that we've been telling. And when we stop telling those stories and we let go of some of those layers, then we actually settle into who we really are. So I believe that this journey is really a journey back. It's not a journey forward toward anything. This journey of self-development is really about undevelopment. It's about a journey back to authenticity, back to who we once were before we started telling these stories. And the best way to do that is actually to get quiet. That could be meditating. That could be just spending more time on your own. You know, one of the reasons that a lot of people get swept up in the complication of human existence and society is because we don't really know who we are. And if we don't know who we are, we don't have a strong self-concept, then we can't know where we fit, and we can't know what fits us, and we can't have anything to align with. You know, align is a relative term. In order to be aligned, you have to be aligned with something. So in order for your goals and your beliefs and your dreams and your network of people and all those things to be aligned with your authenticity, you need to know what your authenticity is. They need to be aligned with something. And the best way to find out what that something is, or what that someone is to be quiet. So it'd be interesting to know if you found something similar to this. In all of my studies over 17 plus years now, the only common denominator that I've found with all across the board people talking about success, the only common denominator that I found is meditation. That almost everybody who is successful, or at least is living the kind of life I want to live, almost everybody has some kind of meditative practice. It doesn't look the same for everybody. But if you think about affirmations or goal posters or nutrition or what have you, like a lot of those are ingredients in a lot of people's recipes, but meditation is the only one that I found. It's not in, you know, literally every single person, but it's by far the most common denominator. And I think the reason is because of the stillness. Like I said, let's get real and let's look inward and let's start listening to our own radio station, which has a lot to say if we listen to it, rather than everybody else's thoughts on podcasts and YouTube videos and books. And all that stuff is good, but it's still somebody else's thoughts. And so we need to start listening to our own thoughts. And that's going to be how we reconnect and reintegrate and realign with ourselves.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about of shedding the external, of stripping away all of those layers of the programming that we've picked up along the way, of the things that teachers told us, oh, well, you are this, or you should be this, or success looks like this, or that our parents told us, or that our religion told us, or that social media told us, or that the bully told us, just all these little bits of programming that we have absorbed along the way that are then compounded by our day-to-day experiences and the stimuli, what we see in advertising, what we see on television, what we hear on the radio and on podcasts. And so I love the point of, to get clear, it's about getting still, coming home to yourself, stripping away all of the external, listening to yourself, coming home to yourself, asking yourself what you want, who you are, what you value. I love your point earlier about how you want to show up, what you want to demonstrate, what you want to model. Come home to yourself, because to your point, we know when we are still and quiet, the answers are within. And now I know so many of the audience is going to say, whoa, that sounds really scary. And what do you mean be still? And what do you mean meditate? And what do you mean feel the feelings? All of that sounds really scary. So what is a tip that you have for navigating that fear and that uncertainty? And what's the most important lesson that you personally have learned about overcoming fear?
You said a lot there in a relatively small amount of words. It is really scary for most of us to even think about going into the vulnerable void, going into that place of who we are, because we do get told constantly through a lot of the sources that you just mentioned who we are. And more than that, we get told who we're not. And so that becomes a familiar concept. I use the term self-concept, which is a really important term. That becomes a familiar self-concept. And then what happens is it morphs into this idea that we don't even know who we are, but we know who we're not. And even if we were able to dissolve the idea of who we're not, that still doesn't answer the question who we are. The good news is that's not anything we need to figure out. It's, as you said, it's just about coming back home. And when we start to dissolve and challenge all of the programming about who we're not, we are actually slipping back into who we are. And I think one of the key components to understand in personal development of any kind is how our brain actually operates in forming the behavior that we have. So in the context of this conversation, you mentioned fear, the fear of vulnerability, the fear of whatever, fear of speaking, fear of relationships, fear of being hurt again, fear of betrayal. We need to understand how our brain actually creates the fear. And one of the biggest misconceptions that I see, that I used to have, is that fear is a bad thing. And if we want to do anything in our lives, we need to get over that fear, or we need to dissolve the fear. We need to somehow reduce the effect of fear in our lives. And what we have to understand, this will be a huge shift for a lot of people if you really haven't dissected this concept of fear, what I'm going to talk about. Fear is a protective mechanism. What that means is something at some point in time, I tend to turn this way when I'm talking about my past. Something in our past at some point in time happened, and we don't want it to happen again. So in order to protect from that happening again, we create a fear. It's like if you get bitten by a dog, your mind, which wasn't afraid of dogs before that, creates a fear of dogs now because you don't want to get bitten again. So we want to create a fear in order to protect, or we do create fear in order to protect. But here's the mind-blowing shift that I had recently. We only protect that which we love. So fear is created from and actually with love. The reason this is really important to understand is that most of us try to fight fear with everything but love, right? We try to fight it with anger or shame or urgency, irritation, right? Well, if I could just get over this thing, and why are you so afraid? And none of that is actually going to dissolve what's dissolvable or embrace what's embraceable, because only love can do that. And this might, sound like a little woo-woo to some people, but we have to change the way we relate to fear. And when we change the way we relate to fear, it can become a teammate of ours rather than an opponent of ours. And most of us, I did this for most of my life, think that fear is an opponent that we got to fight against. We will never get rid of the human capacity or the human brain's desire to create fear. So trying to fight against your fear, it's just a useless thing to try to sign up for. You're never going to be able to do it. You're never going to be able to get rid of fear, but you can make peace with it. You can actually become partners with your fear. Fear is a phenomenal co-pilot. It's just a terrible lead pilot. So when we start taking action and we start to get more aligned, we have to listen to the fears that come up, because they will come up. And it's impossible for us to try to break through our comfort zone without fears showing up at the door. Like, are you sure about this? We don't know what's behind those walls over there. And you told us actually that everything back there is scary. So I'm going to do everything I can to keep you inside your safety zone, right? That's how fear works. It's trying to keep us safe. It's not trying to keep us losing. It's not trying to keep us settling. It's trying to keep us safe. So the only way to actually create a teammate from fear is to embrace its desire to keep us safe, and then recognize that you, as the person who's growing, no longer need the protection that it once created for you. Because, and this happens as we're taking away all these layers that we've been talking about, because the thing that the fear showed up to protect isn't relevant anymore. And it isn't even you. It was a story that was created anyway, once upon a time. But because we don't understand how fear shows up, we don't challenge it. We let stories that we literally sometimes started when we were 4 years old, we let those stories evolve until we're 40 and 60 and 80. And we never sit and turn around and go, wait a second, what if I've actually outgrown the thing that early story was designed to protect me from? What if I do that? And so when we can relate to fear differently, then we actually have a chance to operate with it powerfully. And one final thing, we have this like simple surface level way to deal with fear in, this kind of meme world that we live in. And I'm sure most people have heard, false evidence appearing real. That's what fear stands for. I despise that acronym because it's not true. Fear is not false evidence. It might be a false story, but the fear that your body feels is not false. It's real. And if you take something that's real and try to just say that it's false and try to just power through it, you're not listening to your body. Fear is actually trapped in our bodies. So don't pretend it's not there. And that's what a lot of us are trying to do by just dismissing it. It's like if you have a child that has something to say and they're screaming at you, trying to get your attention, and you just dismiss them and turn around and try to avoid them, they're only going to scream louder.
Yeah.
Your fears are not going to go away if you avoid them. It's about feeling them, actually feel them. And the other thing is, fear, just like all emotions, they can't last forever. The reason they do get trapped in our bodies is because we don't feel them. Yeah. So the best thing we can do with our fear is feel it and explore it and play with it and turn into that child, like you're trying to figure out how Play-Doh works, right? Turn into that child and go, I thought this and I felt this and I did that and I feel this and it's over here. And the more that we explore the real feelings, then we can become a vessel of emotional expression. And fear is no different than any other emotion. It has a shelf life in our body. And if we allow ourselves to feel it and we're not afraid of the fear, then it can flow through us. We can learn from it, and it can actually strengthen us.
Yeah.
But because most of us are afraid of our fear, it controls us.
So as we wrap up here today, let's imagine that you have come to your life best lived. Let's take this full circle. You started with in that hospital deciding that you didn't want to ever live with regret. You didn't want to ever look back. So you have done that. You have lived every day to the fullest in your purpose, in your passion, serving. There's no regrets. What do you want them to say about you?
So first, when you say they, I immediately imagine my children.
Yeah.
What do I want they to say about me? I want my children to say that I lived. While I was alive, did I live? I want them to watch a man who's not afraid of falling, not afraid of crying, not afraid of admitting that he screwed something up, that I was wrong. And I want them to have learned the beauty of and the power in humanity. I want them to see what radical vulnerability looks like. And I want them to therefore give themselves to be radically vulnerable and radically authentic and radically human and radically real and feel what it's like, so that we don't do something that you alluded to earlier, so that I don't spend all of my life avoiding myself and never actually meeting myself. I want to reintroduce me to me every day, because that is a daily process for me. Every day, reintroduce me to me, and let's walk another day together in as much of an aligned way as we possibly can. And it's not easy. I mean, we're gonna fall prey to some of these patterns, and our fears are going to get to us, and we're going to quote unquote fail ourselves from time to time. But can we just keep getting back up? Can we get back in line? And so I want people to say about me that I just kept going.
And so it is. Now, how can people get in touch with you? How can they learn more about your programs? How can they work with you? Where can they find you?
Everywhere online, I am Coach Sean Smith. So that's my YouTube channel, it's Instagram, it's Facebook. My website is coachseansmith.com. If anybody wants a little bit more about the masculinity stuff, I do have a page with a bunch of free resources for masculinity at coachseansmith.com/masculinity. If you're on the main page, you'll be able to navigate there, or you can just go straight there. It has the spoken word poem that you mentioned. It's got another video that is really like a love letter to my son, really, about this is what life tells you being a man is about, and this is what I want to tell you being a man is about. So that's the most tender page that I've ever put up on the internet. But I'm easy to get a hold of, so people can send messages, DM me, email me, Sean at Coach Sean Smith, and I'd love to continue any conversations.
Absolutely. Get in touch with Coach Sean Smith. Sean,
Can I say one more thing? Yeah. I can't believe I forgot about this. So in a few months, I'm releasing my first book, and it's based on so much of what we talked about, especially masculinity, because I spent about 15 years coaching only women. And what I learned is that women's self-esteem and worthiness that you brought up earlier is first created by, and then generally sustained or not by, their relationship with their father. And more specifically, women need to know whether their father was proud of them. Now, we as men are not taught that. I mean, we grow up as little boys and people are not telling us that they're proud of us unless we're finishing first in the race and getting A's on report cards, right? So we're usually taught performance pride. And that's what we generally give then to our children. And what I've learned is that the self-esteem of a little girl and the self-esteem of young women cannot be based on performance, especially masculine definitions of performance. So I wrote a book and it's called Daddy, Are You Proud of Me? And it's designed to be a reporting to men that I've been coaching women all these years. And for those of you that have daughters, this is what they need us to tell them. And this is what you need to understand, Dad, because we didn't learn this, right? So I want to report to them, to fathers specifically, what our little girls need. But then the book is kind of taken on a life of its own because a lot of women are reading it and it's serving as almost like a way for them to watch a coaching session between me and their dad.
Yeah.
And because they're not really in it, they are pulling so much out of it and having realizations. And so a lot of women have said that the book is like, it's fundamentally healed their relationship with their dad, their relationship with themselves. And so this is my most sacred work that's about to be birthed into the world. And so much of it is based on my journey with my own daughter, who's now 20. And anybody that on our website, you can get the first chapter. Again, you can navigate to it and ask questions. Like this is the conversation that really needs to be had, and it'll help both of us on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah. So, Daddy, are you proud of me?
Daddy, are you proud of me?
They can get more information on your website, CoachSeanSmith.com. And I have no doubt it will be released across all channels. So they'll be able to also look on Amazon and all the places where they can purchase books. So before we end today, Sean, any parting words for the audience?
Yeah. I'm going to share my father's parting words to me, who he passed away about 11 years ago. And in our final conversation, I asked him what wisdom he could pass on. How can I live his legacy, my legacy? And with no hesitation, Ellie, and he was all drugged up at the time, he had pancreatic cancer. And so his body was failing him. But even through all the drugs and the circumstances, just with no hesitation, he said, Shawnee, be who you can be, do what you can do, and live a good life. So to everyone else listening to this, be who you can be, do what you can do, live a good life.
Amen. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all of the good that you do in the world, for how you show up, for all of the things that you model, for your presence and your power and your grace and your vulnerability, and the tens and tens and tens of thousands of people that you serve on a regular basis, and to the millions of people that you serve around the world. We thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. It's an honor.
Till next time.